The Ontario College of Trades, we hardly knew you. After just 5 years officially overseeing skilled trades across the province, the new PC government at Queen's Park is dissolving this regulatory body that was created by the previous Liberal administration. Here to help us understand what that means for tradespeople, the infrastructure they build, and ultimately the general public, Jan De Silva, President, CEO of the Toronto Region Board of Trade, Ashley Challoner, Vice President of Policy, Ontario Chamber of Commerce, Sean McFarling, General Counsel to LIUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, John Breslin, National Director of Skilled Trades for Unifor, and Rafael Gomez, Director of the Centre for Industrial Relations and Human Resources at the University of Toronto. And it's a pleasure to welcome 3 new voices to our program. And on the bookends, happy to welcome you two back to TVO. Yeah. We're going to ask, actually, you two and Jen, you three, just to sit tight for a moment, because I want to do, I think, some important background work here, because I'm not going to operate under the assumption that everybody knows what we're talking about here. So, Sean, the College of Trades, it's been around for a while, but if you're not in this sector, you may not know what it is. What was its mission?
Well, from our perspective, the College of Trades was intended to provide an organization to ensure training for various trades, as well as uplift the trades to a certain extent to give them the professional status that many other professionals enjoy, like myself as a lawyer or a doctor, to encourage young people to enter the trades, to ensure that apprenticeship programs were properly administered, to give people the appropriate training they need to engage in the workforce, and then to ultimately protect the public interest by ensuring that we have safe working standards with well-trained, highly skilled individuals entering to the trades.
Do you think it's done that mission well?
Unfortunately, it's been our perspective that it has not. From the LIUNA's perspective, we represent approximately 120,000 workers in Ontario. About 100,000 of those workers are in the trades. Our trades are primarily the voluntary trades, so those individuals are engaged as construction craft workers, general laborers, cement finishers. And our experience was that OCOT used its enforcement officers to try and prevent our members from performing their jobs on job sites, jobs that they have done for decades. Very highly trained, skilled workers were being confronted with enforcement officers who were telling them, actually, you are doing the work of a compulsory trade.
Can you give me an example of this?
Well, the one that came up most frequently usually involved the intersection of what our workers do and what electricians do.
Let me guess, who represents the electricians?
Well...
This guy? Is that what you guys do?
Well, no, I mean, basically, there wasn't the argument with me, and we represent a lot of industrial trades. This was construction trades, so my conflict was never with Sean.
Okay, hold off on that. We'll get to you in a second. Yeah. You finish your story.
To be fair to John, it's a different trade that we're dealing with on this.
Okay.
Now, everyone agreed that an electrician needs to know a broad range of skills in order to do their job. The training should cover everything an electrician needs to do in order to properly be an electrician. But there's a distinction between knowing all the things you have to do to be good at being an electrician and the things that only an electrician can do. Now, I think we would all agree that only an electrician should work with live electricity. But in order to install, say, a light stand for a traffic light, there's the digging of a trench, there's the laying of the conduit piping in which live electricity will be run through. And that work, the digging, the laying of conduit, is work typically done by a construction craft worker. We have thousands of members who perform that work across the province. They've been doing it, as I said, for decades. And what we were experiencing were enforcement officers were coming to our job sites, big, high, visible job sites, very well-respected employers who had also been in the industry for decades, and issuing tickets saying, you have to stop performing the work of an electrician. It's unsafe for both the worker and the public.
Because the college was demanding that?
Well, it was they were employees of the college.
They were employees of the college, so they were fulfilling the mission of the college as they saw it.
The policy mandate, yes.
Okay. John, let me get you in at this stage. In your view, was the mission of the College of Trades good?
Well, the mission of the College of Trades, when its first inception in 2013, was to professionalise the trades themselves and give them the same designation as would be a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, and have a regulatory, college for professional people.
And you okay with that?
Absolutely. That's what it was set out to do. But that was the mandate of the college, but it was never allowed to do that because of the interference, from the government at various stages.
Are you
It
talking
really-
about the previous Liberal government now?
Previous Liberal government, yeah. I mean, so what happened was, any time the college would try and do something, there was roadblocks put in place. And really, I mean, it would never ever delivered its mandate. It was always, I mean, in my opinion, it was always a working process. It's all we had. You know, so if you aspire to be a skilled trade and get the respect that you should have in that designation, and actually encourage young people to be an apprentice and eventually be a journey person, you need a professional college. And so the College of Trades mandate, that's what it was in the beginning. As I said, over the years, you know, there was a lot of fights and bureaucracy from the government outside. I mean, at the end of the day, the mandate was supposed to be for the trades, by the trades. That's what that college was meant to be.
And what did it turn into, in your view?
In my view, I mean, it was trying to be for the trades, but in the end, the bureaucracy and the interference from the government, it really stopped that.
Can you give us an example of something that the government would have interfered with that you thought
Well-
was setting its mission aside?
Well, always, I mean, from day one, you know, compulsory trades, as we're talking about now, as Sean mentioned too, so there's 156 skilled trades in Ontario under the college. And we always said, you know what, that was too many trades at the start because you only have 23 compulsory trades. These are trades who have to be certified and have to pay for the license within the college.
Just give me a second here. What's the difference between a
So a
compulsory and a
compulsory trade would
non-compulsory?
be an electrician, for example, who has to be certified and have a license to perform that work.
Okay.
As a voluntary trade, so 80% of the college itself is voluntary trade, so they don't pay in at all. They can pay, but they're voluntary trades. Compulsory trades, as we look at today, we need them certified, we need the training standards in place. And at the end of the day, when you look at what's called the scope of practice, which is set out what the guidelines are for an electrician, I'll use that example because Sean's used that, right? Part of the compulsory trade is digging that ditch. The reason for that is, and I'm not going to get into the jurisdictional dispute that they have with Leuna. I represent a significant amount of industrial trades, but also trades who have a construction license, which is 309A, construction maintenance. The same license applies in construction. But what would happen is, I mean, we've had incidents where, you know, the ditch, and I'm not saying that, you know, they're not skilled to do that work. The ditch has been dug wrong, we've seen it happen, it's covered a drain, the house got flooded. At the end of the day, the scope of practice and the skill set is there for a reason. They can be reviewed. So I know over the course of time, and it's been and this is one of the things the government did stop, the review of the scope of practice. We had to modernise them, bring them up to date. You know, so we're all in agreement of that because they do need to be revised, and I understand that that's what's happening at the college right now. Within our trade boards, the Board of Governors, who review the scope of practice and the skill sets that would determine what that apprentice would learn during his tenure of approximately 4 years to become a tradesperson.
Okay. So if I understand this, then there seems to be a discrepancy over what the original mission of the College of Trades was and how well it is doing that mission, or whether it has got off course from doing that mission. And we're now in a position to sort of discuss, okay, so what should the remedy be? The government of Ontario has decided that the remedy ought to be shutting the whole thing down altogether. And I want to get into some conversation here about whether that's the right way to go or whether there was an alternative that they should have explored. Jan, you want to come in at this point?
Sure. I mean, our whole position on this is capacity building. We've been advocating for infrastructure, more housing, more transit, more movement of goods corridors. We did some work with our construction sector members a couple of years ago to do some market forecasting of demand. And what we found is over the next decade, 147,000 jobs are generated in the construction sector, majority of which in the trades. Of that, 29,000 are retirement replacements, 118,000 are net new jobs. Our concern with the College of Trades and Apprenticeships was it wasn't enabling capacity building. And if I can give you a personal example, my nephew decided to go through to become an electrician. 35 kids in his class at Conestoga College in Kitchener-Waterloo. 2 of them got apprenticeships. The rest are working as baristas at Starbucks or at Canadian Tire. And we have 147,000 jobs that need to be filled over the coming decade to get our roads and houses and other things built. So our frustration was capacity building and also some of the ratios. And I'd love to hear your opinions on the ratios.
We'll get into the
apprentices to
ratio.
journeyman.
That's a different discussion. Hang on to the ratios for a second. So did your nephew get the apprenticeship?
No.
Did not. And they couldn't get the apprenticeship because?
There was not enough capacity in the system. We had the most restrictive number of apprentices to journeymen in the country.
And they restrict those because?
Apparently that's some of the safety concerns, I guess, except the rest of the country seems to have apprenticeship models that work on a different basis.
Okay, let's, all right, taking a step back now. Your view on whether the remedy for this difficulty with the College of Trades is to shut it down entirely, or fix it, or something else?
Well, this has been a longstanding concern for our members, and we've been asking for some time for modernization of the college. We have had a couple of reports that detailed what kind of reforms we'd like to see. Unfortunately, those reforms didn't take place, and so it is our opinion that it's best to dissolve the college and start again. And we can look to many provinces across the country that don't have a similar institution but manage to professionalize their trades to the same standard as well as improve their labor outcomes, especially for apprentices. So we think there's quite a few options the government has in front of them, and we would encourage them to actively look into what those options are. For the meantime, obviously, the college isn't working, and the Ministry of Labour and Training Colleges and University can take over. But we would like to see some sort of model that aggressively takes on the labour shortage and ensures that apprentices can get through the entire system and get us the skilled tradespeople that we need in this province.
So to be clear, you don't have a problem with the government shutting this down, but you think that work still needs to be done, and therefore they're going to need a new, whatever they want to call it, to do that work.
Yes, absolutely. We've seen over the past 10 years that the college has been unable to meet its goals or fulfill its mandate. And we know that Ontario is facing a massive skills shortage, both now and in the future. Skills Canada estimated that over the next decade, 40% of the jobs in Ontario that will be created are going to be in the skilled trades, but only about a quarter of young people are interested in the skilled trades.
So they're going to go wanting. These
Exactly.
jobs will go unfilled.
And we need to take action on that right now.
Okay. Raphael, what's your position on all of this?
Well, I mean, just from an institutional design perspective, why would you destroy something without having a plan in place? We're just hypothesizing here about what will take the place of the Ontario College of Trades. We don't have an answer. This is not systemic, forward-thinking policymaking. If you think an institution is broken or is not working, propose something that's better, and then allow an institution to either live up to that challenge, to evolve, or indeed break it up and propose something new. This, to me, is not a way forward, it's a way backward. And I think the concerns that were raised about the college system as it was designed to upskill trades and give them the professional designation that other occupations enjoyed, I think was a sound mandate. I think 5 years in existence, which was preceded by reviews that were done in 2008, 2009 by former Deputy Minister of Labour, who was a conservative himself, Tim Armstrong, show that there was a desire for an institution like this. If you look at jurisdictions that compete globally, that provide skills and training, you're looking at countries like Germany, which have similar institutions, albeit Germany has an advantage in that their employers are much more well organized. They don't allow sort of free riders. They all pay into a system that trains up professionals and apprentices, and thereby the country itself has a really high quality workforce at every level of the occupation stratification. And those institutions are well prepared to sort of manage the demands and the supply challenges of the future. One note, the supply problems that are created when you destroy a system that weakens occupational standards, it's not clear that you'll get more supply, because why would someone invest in training if now they know their wages are going to be cut in half once they achieve that certified professional status, or go into a voluntary trade that gives them title but doesn't give them the right to practice? Both of those things are kind of weakened if you allow so much entry into these specific occupations that wages are depressed. Then you don't get supply, which was the problem they had in BC.
We're going to get to that in a second.
Could I just jump in?
Please,
I think you raise an interesting example with Germany, because we look at Germany and feel it works very, very well, because they're streaming kids into career paths at a much earlier age. So grade 8, grade 9, which is part of our problem now, where if you look at the guidance counselors, again, if I look at my nephew, he had a 90+ average, and she called my sister in 3 times to say he shouldn't be an electrician, he should be an electrical engineer, he's too smart to go into the trades. And he wanted to work with his hands. So we've got problems here, but what we like about the German model, and it's what our members are saying, they want to be talking to kids in grade 8 and grade 9 about some of these career paths so that they've got options open to them.
It's certainly a more coherent system. It works in tandem with a lot of pieces, but it's built on institutions. And if you start destroying them and have nothing in place, what are you going to get? A grab bag of ad hoc solutions that don't solve the needs of the 21st century for a leading jurisdiction like Ontario.
You mentioned, let me just jump in for 1 second, because you mentioned a name, Tim Armstrong,
Yeah.
in your previous answer.
Yeah.
And just for those who care, Tim had a piece in, I think, the Toronto Star, Hamilton
Yeah.
Spectator yesterday, an op-ed piece. He was a deputy minister in the Bill Davis government, the David Peterson government, and the Bob Rae government.
Yeah.
So he's an impartial guy. He's worked for all parties of all stripes. And it is his view that the college ought not to be ended, it ought to be mended.
Reformed, yeah.
Yeah, that was his position.
Just as a comment on what you were talking about there about the German system, I mean, so I've done my apprenticeship in the UK at 16 years old, left school, went to college, had a job at 20 years old. The same system as Germany. In fact, we spent several weeks in Germany looking at their system when I was doing my apprenticeship with British Steel Corporation. And Margaret Thatcher was able to put an end to that in the UK. Ultimately, I came here in 1986. But if you look at what happens today, an apprentice at 16 years old leaving school, they're able to go to college and go through their courses and pass. What happens in Ontario today is we have apprentices, the average age is 28 years old.
28?
28. That's the average age of an apprentice. And
Why so much older?
Because they're having other careers, as you mentioned, right? They have other careers. They might go down a career path. All of a sudden, they find out they might want to go back to school so they have two career choices. They might be married, and all of a sudden, we have an average age of 20 years old. So if you haven't been academically involved during those years, you're going to find it tough. And I was discussing some statistics earlier on there. In a union environment, the graduation and completion rates of apprentices is 90%. In non-union, it's less than 50.
And therefore what?
Well, therefore, if you look at how the streamlining of apprenticeships, as we're talking about now, is flooding them, it's not going to work. We do extensive, inquiries, meeting with stakeholders, companies, and how we can place an apprentice in a facility. Because it's not just one-to-one, it's not a one-size-fits-all. You have to look at actual facts. So reducing it to one-to-one, you can see that happen in a small shop, and it actually does happen today, an electrical shop, a small shop, one-to-one. But you go in an industrial environment with 500 skilled trades, they're not going to hire 500 apprentices. We don't have the infrastructure. So
Okay, John, you've got us onto the issue of the ratio. So let
Okay,
me pick
sorry
up on
about
that.
that.
No, it's
Okay.
good, because I want to go there and let's figure out.
but even having the...
Hang on.
okay.
Let's do this. Because, okay,
Yeah.
so remember, the previous government brought in 148, Bill 148, which had a lot of these labor changes that were in place. The new government now is bringing in Bill 47, which will unfurl a lot of those changes. Minimum wage not going up to $15 an hour, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that's going to be different is the ratio, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Okay, Sean, start us through this. Somebody mentioned, back in my day we called it a journeyman. Now it's a journey person.
Journey person,
What
yeah.
does a journey person do?
Well, a journey person is typically an individual who's passed through the apprenticeship program, and John's probably in the best position to talk about that in his role as director of training. The challenge that I have in discussing this is that LIUNA is our members primarily are voluntary tradespeople. There are no apprenticeship ratios for our trades. So,
Which means what?
which means that an employer can hire whoever they want. Right? There isn't a requirement to have one journey person to one or two or three apprentices. We negotiate apprenticeship ratios with our employer partners. Right? So it's not a free-for-all in our industry, but we are not legislated into ratios. We negotiate them with our employer partners to determine what suits the industry best.
In each individual job site.
That's right. So just by way of example, in the Greater Toronto area, in the institutional, industrial, and commercial sector of the construction industry, we've negotiated ratios that are one apprentice to every 4 journey persons.
And the significance of that is what?
Well, what it means is that you've got the individual apprentice is learning from 4 journey persons on site. And that ensures that apprentices aren't used, and this is a concern we both would share, and I think everyone at this table would share. Apprentices should not be a source of cheap labor.
That's the point, right?
Apprentices need to be learning the trades. We desperately need apprentices.
So we don't
to
want
learn these
apprentices in
skills.
there just as an alternative to hiring a real full-time unionized skilled employee.
That's right.
That's the idea.
So in our context, we don't have ratios statutorily mandated. We've worked with our employer partners to find the right balance.
Okay, let me go to you now. The ratio that has been placed is 4 to 1.
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, it could be 4 to 1, it could be 8 to 1. I mean, the reason for the ratios to be put in place is for training, is for mentorship, is for specialised training. I mean, you got a mentor who's training an apprentice, and you have a 1-to-1, right? In a small shop, that might work. But to get the various training and certification that you need throughout your entire apprenticeship, 1-to-1 ratios will not work. It won't create
Well,
jobs.
that's what the Ford government wants
It
to
won't
bring
create
in.
jobs, because if you think about it, 80% are voluntary trades. So 80% of the college, of the 156 are voluntary trades, right? They can have as many ratios as they want. Over 80% of employers today do not fulfill their ratios as we stand today.
Let me talk to an
They
employer
don't
for a
fulfill
second.
them. The jobs are not filled.
What's your view from the Chamber of Commerce on this business of the ratio, whether 4 to 1 makes more sense or 1-to-1 or whatever?
Well, our members have been struggling with the ratios for those trades that are 3 to 1, 2 to 1, 4 to 1. And this is largely an issue for those businesses that are smaller, those businesses that are located outside of major centers, because they have a limited number of journey persons. And so often they don't have enough journey persons to hire an apprentice.
So they can't hit 4 to 1.
They can't, and often if they have a project that expands their workforce and they could hire an apprentice, that project is temporary, and so they can't provide the apprentice with the number of hours that person needs to complete their training. So something that I heard recently from an employer in Thunder Bay, he runs a small residential construction company. He and one of his other employees are Red Seal certified, they're journey persons.
Red Seal means?
It's a type of certification and one that allows you to transfer between provinces.
So top notch.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
But the rest of his employees aren't, and he's been trying to upskill them by putting them through the apprenticeship program. Unfortunately, the size of his business and the size of the projects they get mean that his apprentice employees aren't able to meet their hours, and he estimates that he'll only be able to create 2 journey persons within the next 8 years, and that's not enough to deal with the labor shortages we have.
Right. Okay, Jen, from your member's point of view, what's the right ratio?
Well, and it's not even so much what's the ratio, it's back to how do we create capacity. And I fully take your point, a 500-person operation, you can't have 1-to-1. But the colleges have said in Ontario, we've got the shortest amount of classroom time of any province in Canada. So are there ways of doing back-to-back classroom time to keep people on track when you don't have the on-the-job experience? Are there more co-op models that can be developed? So for us, it's not so much the ratio, it's how do you create capacity?
Do you have an answer for that?
No, that's what I'm saying. I think there's been a lot of suggestions made, allowing more classroom time or back-to-back classroom time rather than forcing you to try to find an apprenticeship when there's not enough capacity to run the apprenticeship.
Wouldn't it have been nice to use an institution, an existing one, to advance these modernization goals instead of abolishing it
You're
and then
saying the
starting
college.
de novo? Yes, exactly.
The challenge with the institution, and you're not wrong, Raphael, but the challenge is over the past 10 years, that institution has been unable to fulfill its mandate. And the implementation is really what matters rather than the policy itself. So
Exactly.
with respect to what Jan was saying about increasing capacity, part of this is also about modernization. The entire apprenticeship process is analog. It could be easily digitized, and that would be a way to streamline and engage both apprentices and employers into the process and hopefully increase the completion rates. And that's something that colleges have been working on since they deliver over 90% of the training.
Yeah, and it's our view. I think it's important. We all agree that we shouldn't have nothing in place for training and to support the trades.
So if not the
But-
College of Trades, something.
So we've, as I've said, we've lost faith in the College of Trades for the reasons we indicated around enforcement issues, and that's largely because one key part of Armstrong was ignored. And Armstrong warned that the overlap of the scopes of practice, if that leads to enforcement issues and exclusivity of job tasks, it will result in the college failing, and that's what happened.
You did a shortcut there. Let's see.
did.
Armstrong refers to Tim Armstrong,
I'm sorry,
the former
yes.
deputy minister
Yes.
for the
Yeah,
3
I was
different
referring
parties,
to-
who wrote the report once upon a time with lots of
2008.
recommendations in here
Yes.
upon which the College of Trades emerged.
And it was followed by 2 more reports, one by Tony Dean, another by Chris Bentley. And this issue of overlaps in scopes of practice being used to prohibit people from doing work that is otherwise safe and easily trained was a mistake. And Dean, for example, mentioned the health model. Healthcare professions encourage overlaps in
Tony
scopes
Dean's
of
a
practice.
former Secretary of Cabinet, now a senator.
right, yes.
And he did a second report on all this.
He did, yes.
And what was his view?
his view it was that enforcement was problematic. The way in which OCOT was engaging in the enforcement
So he agreed with you?
process, to a certain extent.
Kind of
yes.
agreed with you
Yes.
on that.
We
Kind
felt
Because I
that,
met with Tony Dean also, so we had a difference of opinion with Tony Dean also.
there we go. So yeah.
Depends who you speak to.
Okay, well, let me get,
But just to use this healthcare model, so overlap is encouraged where it's in the public interest. So in the healthcare professions, we don't see doctors and nurses fighting over who gives the flu shot. You can go to a pharmacist to get a flu shot because this overlap in skills and knowledge serves the public good.
well,
And
here's
that
the
should
thing.
be the
I get you, but
primary-
hang on a second, Reva. Here's the thing. You two guys are both in the union movement, and Tony Dean's, let's face it, pretty center-left guy. He's appointed a senator by the current Liberal government of Canada. So if a bunch of center-left people can't agree on what to do here, what possible hope is there that the Chamber of Commerce or the Board of Trade, that there's a consensus out there, a sweet spot that everybody's going to find, right? I mean, that's an issue.
But to go back to the compliance and enforcement,
Well, hang on. Who's going to answer that question?
That's an evolutionary,
Yeah,
but
but
that's why you
Who's
need-
going to find the
No, no,
sweet?
but that-
If Labor can't find the sweet spot,
there is going to be contention. There is never an alignment of interests. What you need are mediating institutions that bring those opposing views into some agreement over those issues that they do agree
well,
upon.
apparently the college couldn't do that.
In its 5-year existence with a new government, you could reshape it. This would have been an opportune time to put the stamp that you would like on this institution so that it could achieve the goals that this government wants and what the parties that have all agreed on some problems what the institution had with it. Instead, you abolish it and have no plan. That's
Actually, have you
ridiculous.
talked to, you or anybody in your organization talked to the new Ford government yet about what it plans to do at the end of the day on this?
No, we haven't.
Have you, Jen?
We have, and we've had a report that we produced in 2015 that had several different recommendations, and some of which the province should take on, some of which we're asking our member employers to take on, and some of it we need to work at a municipal level and provincial level with the local school boards and guidance counselors. But again, the thing we're trying to solve is capacity building, and the things we're talking about from a policy perspective is to do a better job of looking at how do we make sure we've got kids streaming into the required post-secondary for the jobs that we need, and it's how do we then make sure we've got a mechanism for the apprentice model, which we support, but for the apprentice model to be realized. So it's, again, looking at what the Ontario Colleges has done, which is looking at more back-to-back classroom, looking at different co-op programs, so you can build capacity within the existing number of experienced journey persons. But it also has to start with the business community committing, and the work that we did in 2015 to come up with that 147,000 job creation number was a lot of work. It was heavy lifting with all the members in our construction sector, but every 5 years you should be getting labor market forecasts that say, here's where the demand is, now how do we solve for it?
When you met with government officials, did they give you any indication of a whole bunch of things? When they plan to make a decision about this, what they plan to land on, what their new solutions, if they don't like the College of Trades, what else are they going to come up
Okay, and in
with?
fairness to the new government, we're continuing to talk to them. We have a talent cabinet. We've been working, in fact, have been working quite closely with LiUNA on this to help work at all levels, because we've got school boards, it's the government, and it's the business community. So I wouldn't just point to the province being the only point of solving this. And this matters. Let me just talk about it for a second. What triggered this was the billions of dollars of infrastructure funding that's finally flowing into Toronto region to get our transit built. And you'll have a Unifor worker at the Courtyard Marriott who lives in Mississauga who has to take 3 transit systems, $20 and an hour and a half one way to get to their job in Toronto
Not a
from
solution.
Mississauga. It's not a solution. So we've got to get the infrastructure built, and we've got to look at how do we create capacity across the whole. And I hear you very much in terms of we need some kind of mechanism for that, but we just didn't see the College of Trades and Apprenticeships, and our members certainly didn't see that being the right body to make it happen.
I mean, there is an irony here. I think the head of the College of Trades is a former progressive conservative cabinet minister. Is it not? Was it not Dave Tabucci? Who was heading it up?
He was. Well, he's retired now.
He's retired now.
Yeah, it's done.
But there we go. I mean, this is not a partisan issue.
done, yeah, I'm
the
sorry.
solution to this has escaped everybody.
Ontario achieved its position as one of the premier jurisdictions in North America. Why? Because governments invested in institutions and built them up so that they would have 5, 10, 15-year horizons. This continued pretty much up until the 1990s. What happened in the 1990s? Short-termism, sloganeering, and a destruction of those institutions that I think made Ontario the premier jurisdiction.
Which part of the 90s are you talking about? The Bob Ray part or the Mike
It
Harris
started
part?
there because it was a pendulum swing, right? It was like, I'm going to listen to my constituents and I'm going to do what's best for them to reward them. And then you had another government that swung the other way. And to some extent, I guess the Liberals tried to mediate and return to some aspect of what was normalcy in Ontario governance, but you know, it doesn't seem to stick. And today we're with another government in power that seems to make decisions by consulting with some, but not others. And I don't think that's, a progressive way forward.
Okay, we got about a minute and a half here. Ashley, let me go to you here on this. We have heard, I mean, you've heard Jan talk about the challenges to get more capacity at the end of the day. How's that going to happen?
Well, it's a tall order. That's absolutely for sure. And you know, this is not a challenge that's limited solely to skilled trades in Ontario. It's the entire labor market. We've heard from our members that 77% say that the ability to acquire and retain talent is the factor that impacts their competitiveness. So we need to be thinking about this on a much larger scale. But I think something that's critical, beyond getting the institutions right, beyond getting the process streamlined, better engaging stakeholders, is also thinking differently about the way that we promote skilled trades. Right now, unfortunately, for a lot of students and for their parents, who are their key influencers, the skilled trades are still seen as a second best choice. And that is wildly inaccurate and completely unfair. Skilled trades are great jobs and jobs that are in demand. So we need to do some myth busting, I think, at a pretty high level.
Great jobs, jobs in demand,
Yep.
jobs that'll pay well,
Absolutely.
jobs you can do for a very long time.
Yep.
It's not like an athlete where you got to find a new career once you turn 30 or 35. So
Yes.
your nephew's teacher has got to get with the program.
Yep, the guidance counselor, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, good. Nice wide shot, please, Mr. Director, as we thank all of our guests for coming from near and far to be with us here at our table at TVO tonight. Much appreciated, everybody.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.